idealistic Indian marketing wizard, a timid but brilliant Jewish idealist from Boston, a strikingly beautiful Russian mathematician and monk-like Irish-American philosopher, engineer, embark on a mission to change the world. No, it's not the start of a comedy routine, it's the plot of a novel by our next speaker, Garry Jacobs. Garry doesn't just write science fiction, he is President, Chief Executive Officer of the World Academy of Art and Science. He is the author, researcher, and consultant on business management, economic and social development education, and global governance. The Indian government recently adapted his strategy for 100 million new jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, Garry Jacobs.
Greetings from the World Academy of Art and Science. Peace is the stable foundation on which civilization, culture, and human security survive and thrive. It's the essential basis and condition for achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by 193 countries of the United Nations as absolutely vital to the future of humanity. Today we live in a world racked by unprecedented global challenges. All of them share common characteristics. They're global not only in the sense that they affect people all over the world, but more importantly, they're global in the sense that they can only be effectively addressed by coordinated action at the global level. None of them can be effectively handled by individual nation states or communities by themselves. They're all interconnected, dependent. Of course, the global pandemic illustrates that so easily for us that a tiny invisible microbe coming from somewhere in China could spread around the world and permeate virtually every country and every community in the world, completely ignorant of and ignoring the boundaries that we consider keep us safe from everybody else or everything else outside. It can only be handled and could only have been handled by coordinated global action, though we could have done it much better than we did. The same is true today we see with the war in Ukraine, that it's not only affecting combatants on the battlefield and their near neighbors, it's affecting the whole world. It's resulted in severe food shortages in Africa. It's resulted in soaring energy prices all over the world. It's impacting on global supply chains and movement of goods. It's politically changing the composition of the political. It's politically impacting the relationship between nations all over the world. We seem to be moving back from a global multilateralism back to the mentality of the Cold War, where we're taking sides and lining up against each other, bringing the nuclear weapons genie out of the box again, where we thought it was at least buried and locked up, and now it's threatening again. It's impacting on climate change. It's impacting on so many areas, which means that we have to handle it together, which means we must have strong multilateral institutions to do that. And that means we must have a global population that understands the necessity of those global institutions and supports them and urges their populations to support them. If we want peace in the world, we're going to have to educate global citizens, not just diplomats, not just military people, to understand the essential role of multilateralism and not just the local politics or the national politics of the country they live in. They're going to have to be pressing for that. That requires a new knowledge, a new education, a new understanding, and new attitudes in the world. These challenges we face also have another characteristic. They're very complex, interlinked with one another, interconnected in such ways that none of them can be addressed independently of the others, just like the 17 SDGs are totally interlinked with each other and can't be addressed separately. And that means we need not only new policies, new strategies, our institutional compartmentalization, where we think that security, or some people think security is under the purview of the military or of the Department of International Affairs, or secretaries of state, when we realize that security is linked, military defense, national defense is linked to every other area of national and global life. It depends on refugees and immigrants. It depends on interest rates and employment and trade. It depends on energy flows, embargoes, financial flows back and forth. The basis for global peace and security lies in human security of people all over the world. Are our experts on national defense and security being taught that, being trained to understand that? In some countries, perhaps they understand it better than the political leaders and the people who are voting for something else. But it's necessary that we all understand that. It's necessary that the whole world is educated to understand that the peace, which is so essential for our welfare, our security, our well-being, is founded not only on how strong our military is, not only on that $2 trillion in annual expending, but much more so on our health, our educational system, our capacity to generate jobs and positive trade relations with other countries, on the distribution of technology for the low-income people and those who we're trying to educate 40% of the world's population, which are not getting out, aren't connected to the internet, and so forth. So everybody needs a different education if we're going to support a system which really ensures global peace as the foundation for global security. And that means that our present strategies, our present policies, our present institutions, even our present way of thinking is not enough. We need a new paradigm for peace and security in the world, and that means we need a new paradigm in education and a new paradigm in thinking. Education is, I believe, the most important invention of all time. It's the institution we've created, a marvelous institution, to take the cumulative experience of humanity over thousands of years, that experience, the acquired knowledge, skill, organize it, abridge it, condense it, and pass it on to youth in a few years, so the next generation can start where all humanity has left off. They don't have to rediscover the wheel every time. They don't have to, hopefully, repeat all of the problems that have been made in the past. We can learn from the past and move forward. And if one of the things we've learned, or should have learned by now, is everything's interconnected, everything's interdependent. And creating a world full of specialists is simply not going to help us or be sufficient when we need people who understand how things are held together. Not just at the highest levels in government or in academia, but people in business, in civil society, in medicine, in all areas, who understand the complexity of the world we live in and how do we have to think holistically. We have to think in an integrated manner. That's the only thing that will help us, humanity, progress fast enough to support the speed and keep up with the speed of change that we're confronting. Our educational system we can give it credit for the marvelous achievements. It's not technology so much. It's education that has changed our political systems. It's education that has reformed our social values and liberated women and minorities all over the world. It's education that's given us a greater tolerance and understanding for people around the world. But if that's true, then it must also be true that there's something missing from our education. Something inadequate still, because we still are facing, in one sense, more pressing global problems than ever before. We are seeing what COVID could do. We see what the war in Ukraine could do. But compared to that, they're nothing compared, they're flea bites compared to climate change. And yet for 200 years, we've had an economic system, an economic theory that completely ignored the environmental impacts. It's not just the policymakers. It's not just the business corporations or the communities. It means the thinking, the theory. Our way of thinking has been fragmented. We can't afford the luxury of that anymore. And that means we need a new paradigm in education that places peace at the foundation and understands that the foundation of peace is human security. For who? For all. And our concept not only of security has to change and be broadened from the narrow idea that security is narrow, national, and we can have our security by the size of our militaries, to realize security involves all of the institutions of society and all the activities of people at all levels, not only within our boundaries and borders, but around the world. As we saw from the COVID pandemic, how the microscopic viruses didn't seem to show any respect for our national boundaries. In the same way, we need a new concept of peace. We can't any longer go on with this idea that peace is simply the absence of war. Peace is not, it's not just the absence of something. Peace has got to be a fundamental, stable foundation on which we can build for the future. Because without that trust and confidence in one another and in the future, we won't be able to take the actions necessary to think long term. We'll all the time be reacting to short-term things as we are in the world today, which seems to have even forgotten to a large extent the 17 SDGs because we've got high inflation and high energy prices. We need to be rethinking our basic concepts, and that's why education for peace that doesn't just talk about it, but thinks about it, and thinks about the necessity of it, the value of it, and the foundations on which it will be based is absolutely essential. So we need a new paradigm in education that views the world, humanity, and reality in a comprehensive, integrated perspective and sees peace, human security, welfare, and well-being in that larger context. And that education must necessarily be presented to every student, a basic understanding of the world. It's not enough we give it to specialists, whether they're political or military or academic or international affairs or anything like that. Everybody needs a basic knowledge in order to understand the complexity in business, in civil society, in medicine, in every field, in order to understand the challenges and the kind of thinking, attitudes, values we need to address them. The World Academy of Art and Science is launching a global campaign on human security for all, in support of the United Nations commitment to these essential goals. And peace is the foundation of that program and of the human security we all need so much. And education is the essential foundation for that peace and human security. On behalf of the World Academy, I wholeheartedly endorse the proposal for an International Day for Education for Peace. Thank you.